Our headline story: what's next for South African Airways? After 17 months in business rescue administration, South African Airways is rounding up bankruptcy proceedings and could be back in the air before the end of 2021. But are the issues with the carrier sorted? What lies ahead for the troubled airline? Let's see what answers we can get for you for these questions and more. I'm Tolulokwe Adelaru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Mismanagement, nepotism, inflation, and 7.8 billion rand, that's about $537 million from the government, South African Airways has officially left bankruptcy protection. The airline is now solvent, according to the company's Intellectual Property Commission. This is mostly due to government's bailout and the fact that business rescue practitioners had let go of about 80% of the airline's workforce. They also reduced its liabilities with creditors and lessors. The South African government has maintained that there will be no more bailouts for SAA, so it is expected that a soon-to-be-announced strategic equity partner will help the state airline get back its wings. As of now, there are no details on who the partner is and what they will be providing in terms of capital or anything else. But an announcement is expected in the next few weeks. But some issues are still anchoring the carrier to the ground. Top among these is the disputes with staff on past wages and benefits. Joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa is economist Ntombi Mbele, and we'll be getting into the issues surrounding South African Airways with her. Ntombi, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's start with about just a little bit of going down memory lane. So SAA, South African Airlines, was in business rescue for a year plus, 17 months. Were you expecting the restructuring to have been completed in this amount of time? Would you say that it's ahead of schedule, it's right on time, or are there still enough issues that need to be attended to and the airline restructured a bit more before we are where we are now?
I think it would be absolutely, ill-informed to say that it has been done in the prescribed time. I think that 17 months from the 5th of December in 2019 is quite a long time, one. But two, we cannot then look at it in a single, way without contextualizing the fact that as an economy, we have definitely been in a recession. And so the accessibility of funds was a problem, one. And two, when you also look at the magnitude of the issues that SAA had as a state-owned entity, continue to become a challenge to then kind of expedite or expedite rather the process of then, making the business rescue to be done sooner than what we've actually experienced. To answer your question as well, the second part of it, do you then think that the process has answered all the questions? I think not. We have seen that there are still creditors that have not been paid, salaries have not been paid, and therefore we are expecting it to be extended over 3 years. However, this time will be under the supervision of the board as well as the executive committee, which will then be appointed shortly.
Okay, so issues are still outstanding. We're going to get into the labor conversation as well as the salaries issues. But the issues, as you said, with the airline are decades old. We all know that. And for the longest time, South African Airways did not turn a profit. And the government has propped it up over the years. But whenever we have these conversations about national carriers on the continent, the conversation then becomes whether or not they're necessary. So let me ask you this. Is there still a place for SAA right now? At the moment, the airline has about 3 16-year-old Airbus A319-100s. It reportedly has 1 Airbus A330-300 and 8 Airbus A340s. This means that SAA will also have to acquire new aircraft, and planes cost money, even if you're just leasing them. The private sector has already taken up some of the slack regarding domestic flights, and internationally, South Africa's visitors have a host of carriers to choose from. So while there's a restructuring conversation, a revitalization conversation around SAA, there also has to be the conversation of whether or not there's still a place for it and is there a need for it. What do you think, Ntombi?
I think you rightfully asked the question, is there a need for SAA? And my simple answer is no.
Wow.
I don't think that SAA right now should have been we should have seen the Department of Public Enterprise pumping to figures of around 7.8 billion rands towards saving the state-owned entity. I think that the funds could have been redistributed into much more urgent, sectors that require that kind of funding, because I don't think that it is economically viable to save SAA. For these two important points, one, as you rightfully put it, we are recognizing that SAA has bigger issues than the ones that were attended to by the Business Rescue Plan. You've got its subsidiaries who are still struggling to keep and to pay even their airport fees. And so what you've seen is that in the last couple of weeks, one of its subsidiary, Mango, has had to put their flights on hold and suspend their flights because they could not be able to pay their fees. And secondly, you've also got the technical arm where the maintenance of these flights have not been done for over 17 months, and two, where you've got the staff from those maintenance having to then be let go. And so when you cut a workforce of people that have such expertise and very rare skill in being able to safeguard, the safety of people boarding into those SAA flights, and you therefore limit the scale of the workforce that is there, I think it already is telling you that we are trying to save a dead dog that has really, has died a long time ago, one, and two, in a global context where aviation is continuing to be troubled by the effects of COVID, and where South Africa is an economy and is a country where a lot of economies have said that they've put it on a list of not wanting to have influx of travelers from South Africa because of the COVID variant. You then really wonder who will be boarding into these SAA flights, because there is just no demand globally for aviation. And so companies that already were not in business rescue were already experiencing these challenges that are, prevalent in the aviation sector globally. And so I don't think that in this time and place, succinctly to answer your question, that SAA has a place in the South African economy.
And I think that's a conversation that's going to have to be a larger one at the end of the day, not just with SAA, but also with some of the people we've heard on the continent are revitalizing conversations around national carriers. There actually has to be a conversation about why African countries seem so tied to this idea, this dream of a national carrier. But let's move on from this for SAA. So you've mentioned, of course, the Public Enterprises Department, and there have been strong words exchanged. A missive, as you might say, was released by the boss of the Public Enterprises Department, and he had a few things to say for white SAA pilots. He accused them of greed and maintaining a self-enriching apartheid-era labor agreement. There are 3 unions involved with SAA, and they've been adamant also in what they say are demands for fair wages. So in terms of the business rescue plan and the new restructured SAA is reportedly only retaining 88 out of more than 700 pilots. There have been different proposals regarding what to do in terms of retrenchment. What's the latest on this?
So the latest on this is that we are still at loggerheads with the South African Pilots Association. And so as things stand, there is still not a way forward when it comes to that. And even with the 88 pilots, some of them don't even have the confidence with being a part of the airline and trusting that, over a year or 2 years, they'll still find themselves in the job market. And so you'd also remember that currently, yes, globally, there is, not much of a demand for pilots because of what's happening with COVID. But having said that, it is still a rare skill, one, a skill that can easily be transferred to a different economy and can even be moved to the private and well-oiled and efficient airlines that exist in the South African economy. And so I think that with the issue of, even you rightfully mentioned, the severance packages, not all of them have been paid to the pilots that voluntarily took them. And even the ones who have been retrenched, and including all the other staff, not all of them have actually been paid. And so when you are fully confident, I think, as a business practitioner and a rescue practitioner, to say that you find confidence in putting this business back on the market, assuming that it will have some form of strategic reform and will then be a new business. I think it was quite premature looking into, as I've mentioned earlier, the issues that SAA as a whole entirety has, apart from the challenges of the unions, as well as the complaints of the pilots. I think another issue that we can actually look and tie this into correctly is how they have said as a recommendation that they're going to have a strategic equity partner. Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the conversation of whether there is a viable business that can look into SAA, be willing enough to take its risks, be willing enough to reassess its projected returns, and then infuse itself as a part of, taking that risk to then assist and support with the capital injection, support with the technical expertise, as well as the commercial expertise, which are necessary for SAA to then be a well-functioning airline. And you would have heard recently that there was conversation around
Ethiopia Airlines.
Ethiopian Airline, correct. And now that conversation was well and ripe in September last year. There seemed to be continuous negotiation. But now, as you would have heard, I think in March, I stand to be corrected, the CEO of the Ethiopian Airline had said that, yes, there are still in discussions, there are still in talks. However, the talks are not really going at the pace that he had envisioned. Mm-hmm. And a lot of speculation in the market is because of the fact that there is too much debt that needs to be paid to then find SAA to be in a strong cost base and a financial liability environment that will then be able to make it a profitable engine and airline, one. Mm. And two, the Ethiopian Airline is not really quite acquainted with the union and the unionization that is, in South Africa and that's prevalent in the South African economy as it pertains to, of course, the Association of Pilots as well as other staff members. And so, when you are a well-functioning and, well-ran business like an Ethiopian airline, you then question yourself if you are willing to take, again, these risks that I've alluded to you earlier when it comes to SAA.
And that's really interesting. I was going to get into the Ethiopia Airlines conversation. So as you said, they had offered what we know as technical experience and technical assistance at a point in time, but they wanted an equity stake possibly in the reborn airline. But as we're hearing, of course, they're not ready to take on the burden of debts, the burden of employees, and also the burden of labor. So the conversations have not moved at the pace they wanted. Do you think the conversations will move ahead anytime this year? Or is Ethiopia Airlines going to sort of reduce the speed as they watch to see what develops concerning SAA?
I think as someone who is in the business environment, and I think as an airline that is, again, one that's well efficient, I think they should then take time to just reevaluate SAA. And by reevaluating is to look at what the actions of the interim board that has been appointed, and therefore the interim executive, even though they have appointed Thomas Khololo as the newly appointed SAA, the interim CEO, who is also expected to continue with running the day-to-day, the day-to-day functionalities and rebuilding SAA. I think they should then wait and see if they are just, first of all, going to be able to keep the flights afloat, one. If they're going to also be able to meet the demands that the union have, because again, if you don't really have pilots that are going to want to be a part of your business, that's something that's too integral, and so with the continued locking out between the unions as well as the board and the executive committee of the SAA, I think I would find it very beneficial and smart and prudent for the Ethiopian Airlines, just kind of wait it out and see if management will be able to kind of turn a steer around of the SAA business.
All right, Ntombi, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we still have to deal with this issue of the unions. It seems that pilots are claiming how much? 11 million rand in allowances. Also, the situation of unpaid salaries. Also want to touch base with the subsidiaries, as we mentioned earlier, Mango Airlines, Air Chiefs, and SAA Technical. What's next for them? And then we'll talk about the new leadership. This is the 5th CEO for SAA in 5 years. What difference can he make? This is Business Edge. Stay with us. And this is Business Edge, and we're asking the question, what next for South African Airways after the airline exited business rescue? Joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa, is economist Ntombi Mbele. Ntombi, let's get back to this union thing. There are 3 unions involved with South African Airways, but we also know that the pilots are now claiming domestic and international meal allowances almost to the tune of 11 million rand. there's also the debt of unpaid salaries. And as you said, there's this conversation about the retrenchment, how much is fair, what's not fair, and also the question of, at the end of the day, the 88s who do remain, how comfortable, how long can SAA hold them, given the fact that they themselves might believe they'll end up on the labor market in the next few months or the next few years. What is going to be the outcome? Because I think it is the business administrators who have said that they want to hear back from labor. They're not making any more offers until labor comes to the table with something substantial.
Absolutely. And so, therefore, with the business rescue now putting the entire onus of resolution on the unions, prior history in South Africa tells you that's really no way to negotiate with unions. You can't then put a figure and say to them, well, that's what we can speak into, and that's what that's going to be our point of engagement. I think knowing the South African union's history, and I also do think that with the interim board, as well as the interim executive, having an understanding of how the South African market is very unionized, I think that's not really the best way to approach it, firstly. And I also do think that as the business practitioner has highlighted in their report, is that they've said that all the salaries and all the funds that were not really given to creditors and paid to employees, and to the amount that they ought to be paid, will then be paid over 3 years. And that is also speaking to the trust that is not really there between SAA as well as the laborers, as well as the union. Because if you can easily, just as last week, again using Mango, decide to tell workers that, we're going to just suspend flights and therefore you're not going to get paid for that, it continues to breed an environment of distrust.
Yes.
And once there's that between the unions, even the customers who are to, buy tickets from Mango, you'll then see a sharp decline in that. And when there's a decline in ticket sales, whether be it from the incompetency of the airline, be it from the debt that the airline has, or even just from demand, because really who's going anywhere because of COVID, then you then find it quite difficult to speak positively about the SAA case, and even speak positively about how they're approaching the unions around the discussion of salaries and wages, and salaries, particularly with the issue of the indebted ones for the employees and the pilots, as well as for the pilots in the subsidiary businesses. So I think that is just, I think, a synopsis of what I think they could do better. I think they should open themselves as the board, as well as the executive, because when the business practitioner submitted the implementation saying that we are confident that SAA will be a solvent and liquid business, I think they should have and ought to at least tie up those loose ends, particularly with the unions, because if you don't have those tied up, then the conversation and the recommendations that they have made as a business rescue practitioner then continues, however, under the leadership of an interim board and an interim exec. Okay. And in as much as you have someone who is, quite competent, that is heading up the board, the interim board that is of SAA, I think the challenges also, are quite exceeding and exogenous of some of the expertise that they have. And therefore, the question of the viability of SAA as a business becomes more and more heightened in the SAA.
Ntombi, let me quickly ask, I need 2 sentences on this, because we've mentioned the subsidiaries, but I want to see what happens next with them. So as we know, Mango did suspend flight operations after about 2.7 billion rand for the subsidiaries. Mango Airlines, Air Chiefs, and SAA Technical have also had issues. 2 sentences so we can talk about the board before we wrap up. What's next for the subsidiaries?
I cannot in full confidence give you an answer, primarily because they were not part of the business rescue plan. So because they were not part of the business rescue plan, most of the strategic insight that is expected from this new board is not really all encompassing, because most of the recommendations that are going to be implemented are only for SAA, the mother company, and not its subsidiaries.
All right. So because we have to wrap up, but it's important we get to the future of SAA, and we do know there's an interim board. There is an interim CEO who is the 5th CEO in 5 years. As you said, he has experience. He's a certified chartered accountant who has also built a career for himself in public service as well. But he comes at a very critical time for the airline, where right now I think South Africa has to decide it's sink or swim. It's we're done and we fold up and we take the loss, as we want to say, on the chin, or we really put all into it. What do you expect in the next few months, in the next year, from the interim board as well as the interim CEO?
In the next few months, I would expect from the board to then strengthen their strategic equity partnership. I think if they can have a strong business case to either be it the Ethiopian airline or any other airline that has the technical expertise that is necessary to rebuild, I think they have to hone in on that. If there is any chance of them rebuilding and getting the necessary capital injection that is required to keep them commercially viable, I think the strategic equity partnership is really the most viable case study that they have. I also do think that with SAA moving forward, there's no way that they can fold up now when we've spent around 7.8 billion rand into saving it. It's an economy that is in a recession and is technically still challenged with the COVID virus and not having the efficient vaccine rollout that we need as an economy. And so I think to sum it up for you, they really would have to strategically manage, even maybe exploring having more than one of the strategic equity partners to see how much they can then find it to be more viable, in the next year or two.
Okay.
However, before I do let you go, I'm not really expecting it. The business rescue practitioner said that they're expecting it to be back on in the airways in July, August. I think that's too premature.
We're going to see what happens. I know there is a lot ahead for South African Airways, and I'm very sure we're going to touch base with you. Ntombi Mbele, thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge. There are a lot more conversations coming out of Africa's most industrialized economy, and we'll definitely be looking to get your insights on those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, that's how it goes. Is South African Airways going to be back up in the skies over the continent and over South Africa in the next few months? It does leave for us to watch and wait. And if it happens, Business Edge will have you with all the details. But as we go with NC4 to watch. And guess what? We start with another airline. Kenya Airways has signed an interline agreement with South Africa's regional airline Airlink. The deal will allow Kenya Airways customers flying to South Africa to connect with Airlink operated flights to Windhoek, Durban, Gaborone, Pemba, Maputo, and Port Elizabeth. It will also enable Airlink passengers to book a through ticket to Nairobi, Kenya, and enjoy connections to other KQ destinations. Moving on from that, Nigeria's revenue earning capacity is under threat. This is because of recent reduction of importation of crude oil by India. As Nigeria's largest importer of crude oil, lockdowns in India's major cities from a COVID-19 surge in April had ripple effects on Nigeria's oil sales. The weekly Mombasa tea auction held on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of May 2021 had 12.4 million kilograms of tea offered for sale. The amount on offer increased from 12.2 million kilograms for the same period last year and from 12 million kilograms offered during the previous sale. The tea auction recorded a decrease in prices, with a kilogram selling at an average price of $1.82 compared to $1.85 during the previous sale held on the 26th and 27th and 28th of April. And finally, on NC4 to watch, South Africa has dodged a bullet for now after Moody's Investor Services skipped its scheduled review of the country's credit rating. This is a move that could mean that the agency needs more time to assess South Africa's economic prospects amid the COVID-19 vaccine rollouts and threats of a third wave. And that's this edition, the Monday edition of Business Edge, right here on News Central. We're on social media, we have a website, we're also on YouTube, and we have a mobile app you can download and take us with you wherever you go. Until next time, I'm Tolu Lakwe Adileru Balogun.